I'm Wes Dooley.
I'm Joe Barresi.
And Joe is a Staten Island kid.
Yes, I use the horn on my car a lot.
And across the river, across the bridge, as he said, he had friends in New Jersey with studios.
Yep.
And one of them did a lot of live blues stuff, which I just think is way cool.
He actually had his own label, and he would track bands and mix it live in 3 days, which was jazz stuff, blues stuff. Incredible, great engineer named Ben Elliott. And the studio used to be a live venue called the Showplace. And then it became a studio, and it was right next door to a strip bar. So it was the craziest situation. You can go in an ISO booth and out the other side, and you could be playing air hockey in a strip bar. But he had the most insane collection of gear. He thought I had a lot of crap. He had the most insane collection of gear. He had a Rupert Neve desk, an AMEC RN, ran super hot, but behind him were walls of gear, much like this. But the craziest stuff I've ever seen. He turned me on to CBS compressors, and Jason Cassaro was the guy that I worked with, who did Power Station and Madonna and Duran Duran and so many great records, and super innovative. But yeah, when I used to go to New York, I'd work with Jason. We'd work at Ben's studio in Jersey.
So you came out here, you discovered Sound City.
I kind of freelanced. So I wanted to learn how to use an SSL, so I took a class at USC. Dick McGilvery was the...
Oh, good.
Yeah, he hired me to work at his place down the street, Sound Chamber.
I remember it with the MM1000.
It was a Stevens when I was there.
Oh, okay. He'd moved to that.
And then I also worked at Sound City on Neves, and I worked at a place called Preferred Sound on a Trident, who owned another studio called Pacific that turned into Cornerstone. That was a newer Neve. So I just kind of freelance assisted and learned rooms, and because I didn't want to, I'd rather work at a smaller place where I have no problem going to get your burger. But I have, then I would clean up at night, but I was the assistant. I didn't want to be a straight up runner. So I became the one, I worked at smaller places, although Sound City's a pretty big place. And then, that was my home base for a long time.
Well, I was first introduced to ribbon mics because I worked for a Bang & Olufsen dealer.
Oh, yeah.
So I had 3 of the stereo mics. I think they cost me $100 a piece back then in the rosewood case. And I didn't own any of the mono mics because the stereo ones just sounded better. And so I just used half of it, and there I am.
Oh, okay.
They'd actually unplug, so I could literally use half of it if I wanted.
Oh, that's cool. But I'm not familiar with them. I started up at Sound City, did most of my recording when I came to California, and they only really had a RCA 77 and a BK5 and a couple the little Shure ribbons. They look like, I used to call them the Razor mic. They look like a Bic Razor.
Yeah. There was one person who could build those. She was very good at it. This is hearsay. I have no direct knowledge of this. But she retired, and they used to send an order and build a few hundred of these every few months. So they sent an order in, and it came back, well, Ethel doesn't work here anymore.
Wow. So what'd they do?
So the chief engineer looked at it all up and said, it's all documented. He spent a week. He could do 1 a day, but the last day he managed to do 2.
And did they sound as good as Ethel's?
They sounded pretty much the same. They met spec. But he went and called Ethel. The number there didn't work anymore, but he found out, she's moved too. That's where we're sending. So she was living down the Sun Belt. And he called and said, well, this is Chief Engineer McGillicuddy.
Was that his real name, McGillicuddy?
No.
Okay.
And we'd like to hire you back for a couple of weeks to train some people. Now,
Should have paid attention.
well, I pay really good money. Yeah, we fly you first class. You had me for 40 years.
Pretty amazing.
I don't have to come back. Bye. Click.
That's awesome.
That was the end of that one. They were glued together. The only person I knew who could work on them was the youngest, latest member of the Harmonicats. And he lived up, I think, Cottage Grove near Minneapolis, St. Paul. And if he wasn't too busy doing custom harmonicas, he
Wow.
could rebuild them.
So after 40 years, no one paid attention on how these things were built that whole time?
Well, you just told her to do it, and she did it.
How many did she do a day? Any idea?
She could. She was productive.
Yeah.
And these are the things that at one point I realized skill
Yeah.
is a big deal. And of course, the part with ribbons, and we're really lucky that we had spent time when I was doing AEA ribbon mics. The ribbon itself is a vanishing art.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go into that mode.
Okay.
Tell me about your life because I'm fading.
All right.
And
From the beginning?
I'm excited that Bob Spiden
Yeah, I
was
mean,
part of there.
if we talk ribbon microphones, really, one of the first, after I got out of the University of Miami studying recording, and I came out here for an AES show. And I liked California so much because of the cool music they were playing on the radio, and it just felt right. And I knew I was going to probably end up here eventually. Oh, sorry. It's going to happen again, probably. That's all right, yeah. I mean, I knew I was going to end up out here at some point, so I never actually graduated. I just split and stayed. And then I started repairing guitars in the evening at a music store and freelance assisting. And Sound City was one of the rooms that I started working at, which, you know, it's to me, it's a room that the mic selection was kind of minimal as far as like really high end. It might have been an M49. There actually wasn't any 67s till later. There was a couple nice C37s and things like that, but the ribbon mics were those Shure shaver mics and one RCA 77 and a BK5. And those mics to me, you know, in front of drum kits, they ended up being more like room mics, except the BK5. BK5 actually was a great mic on guitar for a unique, weird sound. It can handle the power, but the 77 itself was one of those mics that I put up in front of people to inspire them. Because when you see something that looks like a big silver bullet and you know, this is, you know, an interesting sound. Didn't work on everything, but it's also a great room mic. That was my first exposure to ribbon mics, and doing records with Jason Casaro at Ben Elliott's studio in New Jersey. They mentioned Bob Spiden one day and said, I mean, those guys were always really setting the bar for me as far as recording and techniques and using rooms. And Ben had one of Bob Spiden's stereo mics, and we were using it as an overhead, you know. And Jason Casaro wanted to go get one, so they went over to Bob's and listened to some of Bob's recordings, which were incredible. So I ended up buying one as well, and that was my first real ribbon mic purchase.
I remember the guy with studio was running a Neve desk,
Yeah,
and those Neve desks had gain.
yeah.
They really
One on
would
rock
do
drums.
any of that.
We're using it for, you know, recording drums in a rock studio. So there was plenty of gain for overheads, and it was I mean, he built his own mic pre's, I think, right, Bob?
I never used any of his preamps, but I assume he did because as Les Paul taught me, the microphones usually sound better, ribbons, than the preamps. So if you don't have great preamps to go with the microphones,
Right.
people never hear them.
Well, that brings me to yours, actually, because Bill Molina, who I met at Westlake Audio ages ago when I was making a record there, we became friends, and he's my, testing gear partner. So whenever we both can coincide with a day off, we get together and we shoot out 18 ribbon mics or 20 direct boxes or however many compressors. And we've been going down a rabbit hole of different Telefunken 251s right now, and just running mics through the same kind of tests and listening to everything we possibly can. And he's the one who first brought in your ribbon preamp, and it was a single rack space.
Yeah, that
Very
would be
first
a
one.
Preamp with EQ, self-powered, 2-channel. We called it an RPQ.
Okay, so he's the one who turned me on to it.
The blue one or the gray one?
It was gray.
Okay, so second generation, where we decided to make everything look the same.
Okay.
Picked gray.
But he was really the first guy that turned it, because I knew about AEA, because I knew you were making 44s, and Brett Gurwitz from Epitaph Records is a great producer and mixer engineer. He was producing a record up at Skywalker, and he came back and said, I use this AEA stereo mic, an R88, and I just put it in front of the band, and it sounded like I was in the room with them. And he was the advocate. So I started researching. I actually think I might have called over there, and you might have loaned us one to check out for a record we were working on while Brett was here, maybe Bad Religion or something. And so that was my first, I knew about your company as far as mics go, but Bill was the guy who brought in the preamp, who turned me on to the preamp. And then we sat here that one day and shot out a bunch of preamps. You were here that day.
Yeah.
500 series ones, and then ended up buying the dark gray one.
Well, you were listening to our third generation,
Okay.
which we did. The first thing we've done with that was the TRP 500. And that one was everything we knew about something with a lot of gain and clarity. Less said, you can hear the microphone. You can hear the music.
It sounds good on a 57 too, though, because that's one of the things that we shot out. We're always like trying to figure out, what's this going to work for? What does it sound like? So we put the same microphone up and we test a bunch of different preamps. And I think that day we did 2 different color 500s and maybe 1 or 2 different rack versions. And then sometimes we just, instead of using a ribbon mic into that preamp, that's why I got it, because it actually had low end comparable to a Neve. This is my favorite, fat mic pre. So it has tons of gain for ribbon mics, but it actually it's no slouch in the low end department when it comes to fatness too. So it's not just a ribbon mic pre, in my opinion. It can be used on anything.
We found that when we started doing them, that people were using them on a wide variety. And we knew when we did the TRP, the gray TRP2, and then the gray RPQ2.
Which one is that?
Well, you actually have a prototype.
Oh, okay.
Because you were listening to one channel, it might have been the second generation, the other one was a prototype, third generation.
Okay.
And
Talk about the prototype. Oh, it had a girl's name.
What?
Had a girl's name, right? The prototype?
Oh, yeah, that's Joey Krieger, our chief engineer. He likes to just name things.
Okay.
Occasionally he gets pushback because people say, no, they're supposed to have numbers.
I like the name better, honestly.
Well,
easy
when
to
you're working
remember.
with prototypes, it allows you to know you have a prototype, that it's Bernice.
Okay.
Whatever. And we do those because we know that if you just say, oh, this is perfect, that's a moving target. It's perfect with the parts you can buy at the moment. And sometimes you can't get the parts anymore.
Right.
And then you got problems. It's got hard to get transformers at one point.
Even now. It's crazy
you
now.
can't
Right?
get discrete components oftentimes. So we're always trying to figure out, okay, what can we build currently that really sounds good?
Well, that thing really sounds good.
We had people doing music scoring and people doing blues. I happen to like Larkin Poe. I just think they're wonderful performers and people. And, our mics have a place in the projects they've done that got nominated. And I loaned their engineer at Beltone the new TRP 500s you first started with. And he said, wow, I like my APIs a lot in the rack, but these have some characteristics I also like. I'm going to have to buy some of these too.
I think it's far superior to an API, personally. But
depends on what mics you got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Chuck Kavoris was one of those guys that had a studio behind his house, and he was doing a lot of blues records, and he had a bunch of your mics, and we were putting those mics up in front of guitar amps, and to me, like, they sounded real, like I was in the room. He had some really nice spaces in his studio, nice, like a little ISO booth, and he cut a lot of stuff live with ISO cabinets in the room with the drum kit. Stuff's bleeding, like real musicians. And but I remember trying an 84 and a 92, and those are both the...
Yeah, the 84 was the first thing I did that was not a 44 derivative directly.
Yeah.
My daughter was going off to college. My wife is a teacher. My daughter became a teacher after she graduated for a few years with Teach for America until '08 killed all the teaching jobs.
Oh.
And I needed my contribution because putting ribbons in mics and building 44s, which are expensive microphones, doesn't mean you're going to make much money. It just means you're having a good time. And so I took what I'd known about making dummy 77s, because I'm Shep's dealer, so I put 77 shells and then a Shep's inside it. And that's when they did Prairie Home Companion, the WLT microphone up there with Garrison. That was one of our dummy stage prop mics. And so I had this thing. I'd done all the work to make the spare parts. That was let me service the mics. And then I had this whole thing I'd done for the film industry guys. So I said, okay, I know it sounds good because Shep's likes the way it sounds. They sold some of them. And
or was it a Shep's ribbon? Or was it a Shep's capsule inside the 77 rhythm?
I put full Shep's side address, cardioid, super cardioid figure eights inside these. And Shep's thought they sounded so good and they looked cool that they sold some of ours.
That's cool. You still have any?
So not many. Because what I wound up doing was I could put the big ribbon out of the 44 and same transformer, same low frequency tuning. But I had shop classes in junior high school here in Pasadena back in the 50s. I should be able to make, and I made something that fit in that was less expensive to make.
And that was the 84?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds great on guitar. Those are my two favorite on guitar. Together, it's incredible because the 92 has a little bit more mid-range, I think. When you add them together and you get the big top and bottom from the 84 and the mids from the 92, it's like a massive guitar sound.
Well, I'm really pleased to hear that because what we discovered that just blew me away, I was hearing that in Nashville, because when I sat at Vance Powell's studio like this, Vance said, oh, that KU5 guitar amp stuff, I did some shootouts after you loaned it to them. because Mickey Raphael does Chris Stapleton's harmonica stuff. And he's heavily into our preamps because he uses, like Howard Levy with the Flecktones, our preamp, and they both do it because they use 160 buyers.
Buyers.
And when they both had the same experience, they took their new preamps, someone had said, oh, you'll sound better if. And they, at a practice, people said, oh, new microphone? No, same microphone. Oh, new preamp. Bring it on tour.
Wow.
And they independently called me and said, need a spare line lump power supply so that if it goes or it gets lost,
Oh, yeah.
I'm fine on the road. And so Mickey has listened to all three generations. He bought the original TRP, then the TRP2 when he needed a second rig with Willie Nelson, and then he tried the TRP 500s, and that's the A and B rigs with Chris Stapleton.
That's
So
cool.
I kind of paid attention to road stuff because I love live music.
Yeah, and ribbons get a bad name live a lot of times because of the figure eight, picking up a lot of leakage. But when you know how to place a microphone, then it sounds more natural to me.
Well, we have people starting with the supercardioid KU4 that we loaned to some people playing at the Greek Theater. And this was Steely Dan. And our German engineer, Julian David, went back to collect it the last day. And they said, oh, we don't know where it is right now, but we'll get it back to you. And my wife, Sarah, a school teacher, talked every week to their tour manager and said, about the microphone.
They weren't giving it back.
Well, she knows the drill, which is when they get to the last stop on the tour, here it is. Thank you.
Right.
So it was shipped back after the first night at Madison Square Garden. And she said, thank you very much. Next day gets a phone call and gets handed Walter Becker, this credit card will be here when that gets there at the end of the week because we shipped it ground. I'll send that one back to this place on our FedEx number.
Wow. So they regretted sending it back.
Well, what happened was Walt Weiskopf and such who were using it, they're good artists and they let friends come to the concerts and some of them came multiple nights. And so several people came up and said, oh, it was a great solo again, Walt, but sorry the sound system broke. What? Well, it sounded much better last night. And of course, the ideal experiment is one variable. The only thing that changed was they went back to the mic they'd been given for free and sent back the one that would have cost money. And
that's usually the case.
they bought that one back. And then I was told that they had a long shootout with the trombone player, the sax players, just an extended sound check, listening to microphones. And that's why there's a KU4 on the downstage solo, and then the trombone upstage has a KU4, and then there's a couple of 84s for upstage sax.
Yeah.
Because they could all hear the difference.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's just natural sounding when you have the figure eight going too, and the fact that you can put your stuff in front of something fairly loud. It's nice. It's not a very upfront and in your face sound. It's more of a real sound, like you're in the room with it.
Yeah. It's what we originally called reinforcement.
Right.
We're trying to make it the same, but a little louder.
Right. Yeah, not anymore.
I used to do that with harpsichords.
Really?
That was really tricky, but I was the pro Kef dealer in the United States, and they were the first people, Kef in England, to work on stuff, one, so that you didn't have different sounds depending on the humidity, because
The
paper absorbs humidity.
Kef, the speaker company?
They had the first synthetic consistent speaker sound with the
So how do you mic a
dexedrine or
harpsichord?
whatever.
How do you mic a harpsichord?
Oh, I used a PCM mic. Originally, we made our own, and then a friend here in town started making them and patented them
Underneath?
as PCMs. The first ones we used were down here on Hill Street at the Catholic Church. We couldn't get the recording we wanted, and they were recording the new masses in the vulgar tongue of English.
Wow.
And so Ron Stryker and I took, and I said, I
Stereo
worked
handbook.
something out. I used to go when I was paying my way through college. I would record anything, anywhere for not much money, and for a little bit more money, you could make 100 records. So we cut records, had them pressed, printed, did artwork, all that stuff.
Can Stryker write a book?
New stereo sound
That's
book.
it, yeah.
It's currently on the 3rd edition. It's kind of the reference book.
Yeah, I think you gave me a copy.
Yeah.
I read it when you gave it to me, but it's been a while. But I remember that name. Very enlightening book.
Well, the good thing is stereo doesn't go out of style.
Dual mono now in somebody's earbuds.
Yes, which is very equivalent in my mind to binaural.
Yeah.
And when I went and recorded, my standard technique, because I'd go to a new place all the time. I went to schools, churches, clubs, and so my overalls were a pair of KM84 Neumanns or Shep's MK4 cardioids. They would go to 40 kilohertz, and I had another half octave of bass. But the 84s were rolling off at 20K, so they had that polite Neve sound. So sometimes what I wanted was really very natural, like you hear it. But when I was working with Wally Hyder, he said, well, if you don't like the way the thing sounds, go put your head where the microphone is.
That makes sense.
So, we all play with this stuff. We all try to find out what we can. I'm really pragmatic. That's why I like to talk to people like you.
Well, I think, honestly, the ribbon mic has made the world a better place. It just can't be used for everything, but when you do use it, it's the closest thing you can get to the source. Like you said, reinforcement.